Welcome to the case of the Zanzibar Telegraph Cable, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Shadows of Empire. The unseen cases of Sherlock Holmes, playing in the year 1898. It is with some astonishment, and no small measure of gravity, that I find these particular accounts of my adventures with Mr. Sherlock Holmes now seeing the light of day. For many years they lay under lock and key, deemed matters of state by the Foreign Office, documented within official reports and our own private correspondence. These were the years between roughly 1885 and the Great War, when the empire stood at its zenith, yet beneath the veneer of power, shadows of intrigue and colonial complexities stretched across the globe. Holmes often navigated treacherous waters, far removed from Baker Street, confronting dilemmas that tested not only his intellect, but the very foundations of British influence. This collection, then, might be aptly titled Shadows of Empire, the unseen cases of Sherlock Holmes. Allow me to commence with a most peculiar affair that threatened to embroil us in international discord. I shall now recount the particulars of the case of the Zanzibar Telegraph Cable. Chapter 1. The November evening had drawn in early, and a chill fog, thick as any I had seen that autumn, pressed against our Baker Street windows. Within, the cheerful crackle of the fire in the grate and the rustle of Holmes's innumerable papers offered a familiar comfort. I had laid aside my book, watching my companion as he sat hunched over a perplexing chemical experiment, the acrid scent of which occasionally pricked the nostrils. Suddenly, the sharp clang of our doorbell echoed from below, followed shortly by the tread of Mrs. Hudson upon the stair. She entered bearing a silver salver, upon which lay a single, cream-colored envelope. Holmes straightened at once, his experiment forgotten. His voice was keen. "Ah, that will be a matter of some urgency, Watson. Observe the seal, the Diogenes Club, and delivered by special messenger at this hour." Mycroft stirs himself from his usual inertia only for affairs of national, if not international, import, declared Sherlock Holmes. He broke the seal, his eyes scanning the brief message within. A frown creased his brow. Without a word, he rose and reached for his ulster. The clatter of hooves and the rumble of wheels from a waiting hansom cab drifted up from the street, a sound somehow more insistent than the usual London traffic. "Our presence is required instantly, Watson. The game, as they say, is afoot, and on a grand scale, I suspect." Our journey through the fog-bound streets was swift, the cabman urging his horse through the murky thoroughfares. Pall Mall, when we reached it, was an avenue of ghostly lamps. The Diogenes Club loomed before us, its windows dark save for a few discreetly lit rooms. Within its portals, the customary profound silence reigned, a hush so deep it seemed to absorb the very sound of our footsteps on the marble floor. A liveried attendant, moving with ghost-like quiet, directed us to a private chamber. There, standing before a grand fireplace in which no fire burned, was Mycroft Holmes. His usual air of languid intellectual superiority was entirely absent, replaced by a palpable gravity that I had seldom witnessed. His large frame seemed somehow more burdened, his brow furrowed with a deep and pressing anxiety. His voice, usually a measured drawl, was imbued with a somber urgency. "Sherlock, Dr. Watson, I am relieved you came so promptly. We face a crisis of the first magnitude," replied Mycroft Holmes. "Your summons suggested as much, Mycroft. What is amiss?" Sherlock Holmes said. "The Zanzibar Aden telegraph cable," he stated, his words heavy with import. "It has been severed for the third time," Mycroft Holmes replied. "I confess the name meant little to me beyond a vague notion of colonial enterprise." Holmes, however, leaned forward abruptly, his eyes alight with that familiar spark of intrigue I had seen so often at the outset of a challenging case. "Again, then this is not the first instance. How many times and where precisely?" Sherlock Holmes pointed out. "3 times in the past month, Sherlock, always in the deep water sections, rendering repair a lengthy and costly endeavor, Mycroft Holmes said. This cable, as you are aware, is the primary artery of communication with our interests in East Africa and, by vital extension, India. Its silence is catastrophic, remarked Mycroft Holmes. Mycroft paused, the only sound in the room the distant, heavy ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall, each tick seeming to underscore the gravity of his words. Orders cannot be transmitted effectively. Intelligence is dangerously delayed. Control itself is compromised. Mycroft Holmes answered. The potential for unrest, for foreign powers to exploit such a vacuum, it is unthinkable, said Mycroft Holmes. The Eastern Telegraph Company is officially baffled. They attribute the damage to unusual submarine disturbances. The Admiralty, however, suspects sabotage, and I confess their suspicion aligns with my own gravest fears, Mycroft Holmes replied. A grim silence settled for a moment, the unspoken threat of foreign interference hanging heavy in the air of the usually staid clubroom. The implications, Sherlock, should this indeed be the work of a rival power, they are dire. The Empire cannot afford such a persistent vulnerability, replied Mycroft Holmes. Holmes listened intently, his gaze fixed upon his brother. And you wish me to discover who, or what, is responsible for these convenient submarine disturbances, Sherlock Holmes said. Precisely, Sherlock. The security of the Empire may well depend upon your peculiar talents. You must identify the culprits, and swiftly, responded Mycroft Holmes. A brief, significant pause followed before Mycroft delivered his final, crucial point. The resources of His Majesty's government are, of course, at your disposal, Mycroft Holmes replied. Holmes rose, a spark of anticipation in his eyes that belied the grim nature of the task. A most intriguing problem, Mycroft. The threads of this affair will undoubtedly stretch far. Watson and I shall begin our inquiries at the Eastern Telegraph Company at first light. Their records may speak more plainly than their officials, remarked Sherlock Holmes. The weight of an empire's concerns seemed to settle upon our shoulders as we left the hushed confines of the Diogenes Club, the fog outside now seeming to hold not just a chill, but 1,000 unseen threats. The summons from Mycroft had lent an unusual urgency to Holmes's typically brisk pace. As our hansom clattered to a halt, I gazed up at the imposing stone edifice of the Eastern Telegraph Company's headquarters in Moorgate. Even from the curb, a low, persistent hum, the very pulse of global communication, seemed to emanate from within, overlaid by the nearer rumble of city traffic. The air, thick with the damp chill of a London morning, carried the scent of coal smoke and wet pavement. Inside, the vast main hall echoed with the frantic clicking of countless telegraphic instruments, a metallic symphony played by unseen hands. Clerks, like diligent ants, scurried between desks piled high with dockets, the sheer scale of the operation immediately apparent. We were ushered with minimal delay into a quieter, more opulent office. There, a Mr. Alastair Finch, the company director, awaited us. He was a portly man, his face etched with worry, and he greeted us with a voice that was surprisingly thin and taut, like a wire stretched to its limit. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, your arrival is most timely. This affair is causing considerable consternation, I assure you. Considerable indeed, company director replied. Indeed, Mr. Finch, the strain of this business is quite evident. We are here to offer what assistance we can, asked Dr. John Watson. Consternation is a mild term, Mr. Finch, for what could cripple imperial correspondence. I require access to all records pertaining to the Zanzibar Aden cable, its laying, its composition, and most crucially, every detail of the recent repairs and the nature of the damage found. Sherlock Holmes responded. Finch, visibly taken aback by Holmes's directness, gestured towards a large table already burdened with ledgers and rolled charts. The stiff crackle of parchment filled the room as he indicated them. Everything we have is at your disposal, Mr. Holmes. We are quite at a loss. Natural causes, seabed shifts, but so frequently. It seems improbable, company director replied. For the next hour, Holmes was a whirlwind of focused energy. He unrolled vast nautical charts, his long fingers tracing lines across the Indian Ocean. He pored over telegraphic logs, his brow furrowed in concentration. The only sounds in that grand office were the rustle of paper, the distant, incessant chatter of the machines from the main hall, and the occasional scratch of Holmes's pen. I confess, the meticulous sifting of so much information would have tried the patience of any ordinary man. Mr. Finch, for his part, seemed to grow more agitated with each passing moment, his nervous pacing by the window a stark contrast to Holmes's profound stillness. Yet Holmes himself appeared utterly absorbed, a hunter upon a fresh scent. The sheer volume of data is overwhelming, Holmes. Are you finding a pattern in all this? Wondered Dr. John Watson. Holmes merely grunted in acknowledgement, his eyes still scanning the documents with fierce intensity. I watched him, fascinated as always by his methods. He cross-referenced dates, depths, and the terse reports from the cable ship captains with astonishing speed. Slowly, a grim satisfaction began to dawn on his hawk-like features. "Mr. Finch," stated Sherlock Holmes. Holmes said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet industry, "These severances are not random. Observe." He spread a chart upon the table, weighting its corners with inkwells. With a red pencil, he began to circle locations. The first break here at a depth of nearly 700 fathoms. The second, a week later, 60 miles eastward, but at precisely the same depth. The third, a similar interval, further east still, and again the depth is consistent, between 680 and 720 fathoms, always in the deepest sections of the charted trench, and always, it appears, where the cable makes a slight but discernible curve to avoid an undersea ridge. His finger tapped decisively on the chart. This is not the work of chance, nor of any common trawlerman. This is deliberate, calculated, and undertaken by someone with an exceptionally precise knowledge of the seabed and the cable's exact route. Furthermore, the damage reports consistently mention a clean slice, not a chafe or a break one might expect from an anchor or natural abrasion, replied Sherlock Holmes. A clean slice, Holmes, that is sinister indeed. It implies a specialized tool and considerable expertise to wield it at such depths, asked Dr. John Watson. Good heavens, Holmes, sabotage then, but by whom? And how in such depths? Said company director. His voice trembled slightly. The who and how are precisely what we must ascertain, Mr. Finch. The why is perhaps more readily apparent to silence the voice of the empire in East Africa. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Holmes rolled up the chart with a decisive snap. The sounds of the bustling office outside seemed to press in, a reminder of the vast network now under threat. Your records have been most illuminating. They point to a sophisticated adversary. Now, Watson, our inquiry must take a different turn. We need information of a more personal nature concerning certain individuals whose interests might align with such disruption. Personal, Holmes. Do you mean to delve into the motives of potential enemies of the Crown or perhaps competitors? Dr. John Watson replied. Precisely, Watson. The why may be geopolitical, but the who often has a face, a history, and perhaps a grudge. We leave the realm of pure data and enter the murkier waters of human ambition and rivalry, declared Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's gaze was distant, already formulating the next move. I knew that look well. It invariably preceded a dive into the complex web of human motive. It was a realm where, I had long observed, Holmes was equally, if not more, at home than among the cold facts of charts and figures. The game, as he would so often say, was truly afoot, and its scent, I sensed, was leading us away from the dusty ledgers of Moorgate and towards the drawing rooms and shadowy corners of international intrigue. The pattern Holmes had unearthed in the repeated severances of the Zanzibar cable lay starkly before us on the rough-hewn table at the Eastern Telegraph Company. It was a chilling geometry of malice, and the urgency of the matter had impressed itself upon us with renewed force. Back in our Baker Street rooms, the hiss of the gaslight was a familiar comfort, yet the silence was heavy with unspoken possibilities, punctuated only by the distant rumble of a late-night carriage. His voice, when he finally spoke, cut through the quiet with its usual precision. The company officials see only disruption, Watson. I see a deliberate hand, guided by intelligence. We require insight into the political undercurrents, specifically those concerning German interests in East Africa. There is one individual in London uniquely positioned to provide such enlightenment. Lady Beatrice Foxglove, Sherlock Holmes noted. I was well acquainted with Lady Foxglove's reputation. A widow of considerable charm and even more considerable connections, her salon was a known hub for those who moved in the higher echelons of society and government. Within the hour, a hansom cab, its wheels clattering a rhythmic beat against the cobblestones, deposited us before an elegant Mayfair townhouse. The faint strains of a pianoforte drifted from an upper window, a melody quickly silenced as a liveried footman answered the firm rap of Holmes's knuckles against the polished oak door. We were ushered into a sumptuously appointed drawing-room, where the air was faintly scented with beeswax and roses. Lady Beatrice Foxglove rose to greet us, a woman of perhaps 50 years, her silvering hair impeccably coiffed, her eyes bright with an intelligent curiosity. The rustle of her silk gown was the only sound for a moment, a soft whisper in the opulent quiet. Her voice was clear and carried a pleasing musicality. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, an unexpected pleasure. To what do I owe this visit? I trust it is a matter of some import to draw you from Baker Street. Lady Beatrice Foxglove replied. Indeed, Lady Beatrice, your discretion is as renowned as your knowledge of certain international affairs. We investigate the repeated sabotage of the Zanzibar Telegraph cable. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Lady Foxglove gestured for us to be seated. As we settled into plush armchairs, the muffled sounds of London beyond the heavy curtains faded away. The room fell into an expectant hush, with only the soft ticking of a nearby clock punctuating the silence as Lady Foxglove fixed her gaze on Holmes. She spoke in a lower, more confidential tone. Sabotage, you say? Interesting. There has been activity, answered Lady Beatrice Foxglove. She paused, perhaps choosing her words with care, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the beeswax, as the mantel clock seemed to count down moments of growing tension. German naval vessels, ostensibly on scientific survey missions, have been noted taking rather peculiar routes near the cable lines in the Indian Ocean. Far more detailed soundings than one might expect for mere cartography, answered Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. The information was clearly of the utmost significance. I felt a familiar thrill, the sense of the game being truly afoot, the quiet hum of the city outside a stark contrast to the international intrigue unfolding within. And the political climate in Zanzibar itself, Lady Beatrice. Sentiment towards British interests, declared Sherlock Holmes. A slight frown touched her brow. Volatile, Mr. Holmes, decidedly volatile, Lady Beatrice Foxglove said. She leaned forward slightly, the delicate scent of roses from a nearby vase momentarily stronger. The distant city sounds seemed to fade further, replaced by the intensity of her hushed words. The Sultan is nominally pro-British, but there are powerful factions, traders like Sheikh Rashid bin said, who resent our influence, particularly our stance against the slave trade, remarked Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Her gaze met Holmes's directly, conveying the gravity of the situation. The rustle of her silk dress was a soft whisper in the otherwise quiet room, a room now charged with unspoken implications. They find sympathetic ears amongst certain German elements who are only too eager to exploit any dissent. Anti-British sentiment is easily fanned, and the Germans are not above providing the bellows. Holmes sat back, his fingertips pressed together, his gaze fixed upon some distant point. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed the quarter hour, its sonorous tones echoing the gravity of the discussion, each chime resonating in the stillness. "So, Watson," Holmes mused, his eyes gleaming, "we have motive and means. The Germans seek to disrupt British influence with their naval power and local allies. And those survey missions, they've mapped the seabed thoroughly. It all fits the pattern of the cable breaks, wouldn't you agree?" remarked Sherlock Holmes. He rose, his energy suddenly palpable. The pieces were beginning to fit together in his mind, forming a coherent, if alarming, picture. The very air in the room seemed to thrum with his deductions. "It would seem so, Holmes," I agreed. "But to prove such a complex international conspiracy," wondered Dr. John Watson. He cut me off with a wave of his hand, his voice sharp with conviction. "Proof will be found where the cable meets the land and where it is so persistently broken," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He turned back to our hostess, his usual detached demeanor giving way to a focused intensity that seemed to charge the very air in the elegant drawing-room. "Lady Foxglove, your intelligence has been invaluable. It confirms my hypothesis that this is no mere accident of the deep, nor the work of disgruntled locals acting alone," Sherlock Holmes said. He paced a short step towards the window, then back, the polished floorboards offering only the faintest creak beneath his restless energy, a small sound in the grand room. "The precision, the timing, the resources implied. It points to a state-sponsored operation, or at the very least, one with significant backing," Sherlock Holmes said. Lady Foxglove inclined her head, a thoughtful expression on her face, the firelight catching the silver in her hair. "Be cautious in Zanzibar, Mr. Holmes." Her voice was low and earnest, the earlier musicality tinged with concern. "It is a beautiful place, but its currents run deeper and more treacherously than those in the ocean itself," Lady Beatrice Foxglove answered. A shadow seemed to pass over her features as she imparted this final piece of counsel, her gaze steady on Holmes, the warmth of the nearby fire doing little to dispel the chill of her warning. "Herr von Clausen, a German botanist there, is said to have an uncommon interest in marine topography. A name perhaps worth remembering," remarked Lady Beatrice Foxglove. With our thanks offered and accepted, we took our leave. The heavy oak door closed behind us with a soft thud, and we found ourselves once more on the London street, the sounds of the city pressing in, the clatter of hooves, distant shouts, the general murmur of Mayfair life. As our hansom navigated the evening traffic, its wheels a steady rumble against the damp cobblestones, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horse, a familiar London counterpoint to the exotic destination now fixed in our minds. Holmes declared, his tone decisive, "There is nothing more to be learned in London, Watson. Our path is clear. We must go to Zanzibar ourselves, and at once. The game is afoot on a far grander stage now," declared Sherlock Holmes. Zanzibar. The name itself conjured images of exotic locales and unknown dangers. I felt a surge of anticipation, mixed with a not inconsiderable trepidation. For the journey and the investigation that lay ahead, the rumble of the cab, a prelude to the ocean voyage to come. The grey chill of a London autumn faded into memory as our P&O liner plunged into the restless Bay of Biscay. Now, several days into our voyage, the endless Atlantic stretched before us, a constant reminder of our journey's purpose. The engine's rhythmic thrum vibrated through the deck, a constant companion, and salt spray often misted the air when I ventured from our cabin. After intense, silent contemplation, Holmes stirred. He had commandeered our cabin's small table, spreading it with charts and documents, some from his consultation with Lady Foxglove. The ship's gentle sway caused the papers to slide almost imperceptibly, a motion Holmes corrected with an impatient tap. His voice, clear and devoid of languor, cut through the cabin's quiet. "Watson, your medical expertise extends to the anatomy of intrigue, does it not? Come, lend me your ear, and perhaps your sturdy common sense," stated Sherlock Holmes. I drew my chair closer, the scrape of its legs momentarily loud against the background hum of the vessel. He indicated a nautical chart showing the waters between Aden and Zanzibar. "Observe," he continued, tapping the map. "The cable lies in considerable depths here. Reports speak of clean severances, Watson, not fraying from coral abrasion, nor mangling from a dragged anchor. No, this points to deliberate, precise action," deduced Sherlock Holmes. "Meaning specialized cutting equipment, Holmes, and a vessel capable of operating with such tools in deep waters," I ventured, trying to follow his rapid train of thought. Wondered Dr. John Watson. "Precisely, which narrows our field considerably. Now, consider the political climate, so astutely outlined by Lady Foxglove. German ambitions in East Africa are no secret. Their desire to disrupt our communications, to sow discord, is palpable." He tapped another document, a dossier of sorts. "And then we have Herr Otto von Clausen, the alleged botanist with a rather pronounced interest in submarine cartography, a curious hobby for a student of terrestrial flora. Would you not agree?" Sherlock Holmes said. His keen eyes met mine, glinting with certainty. The ship's timbers creaked rhythmically, punctuating his words. The ocean's vastness around us seemed to mirror the intrigue's depth. "It seems a bold move, even for the Germans," I mused. "Such an act of sabotage could easily escalate. And what of the local elements? Sheikh Rashid, for instance. His resentment of British influence is well documented. Could he be a pawn, or perhaps a more active player?" responded Dr. John Watson. I reflected on Britain's imperial reach and its responsibilities. The cable, a sinew of empire, was vulnerable, exposing delicate power balances in these distant lands. Zanzibari culture, from what little I knew, was ancient and complex, unlikely to accept foreign domination passively, regardless of supposed benefits. "An excellent point, Watson," Holmes conceded, his tone thoughtful. "Sheikh Rashid's grievances are a potent motivator. He may possess local knowledge invaluable to any foreign power seeking to operate covertly. It is possible he is being manipulated, or he may see an opportunity for his own ends. The Germans would certainly find a disgruntled local ally most convenient," replied Sherlock Holmes. He gathered the papers, his movements precise despite the ship's gentle roll. Through our porthole, the setting sun painted the waves in orange and purple. A sailor's distant call drifted on the evening breeze. "Our initial strategy upon arrival must be twofold," he stated, his voice firming with resolve. "First, to observe Herr von Clausen without alerting him to our specific interest, his routines, his associates, his access to the harbor. Second, to understand the true nature of Sheikh Rashid's influence and his connections. This journey, Watson, is more than mere travel. It is a period of vital preparation. The currents we are sailing into are as treacherous politically as they are nautically." I nodded. Our arrival in Zanzibar would plunge us directly into this maelstrom. The prospect was daunting, yet with Holmes at the helm, the intellectual chase remained irresistible. The ship's bell tolled the hour, marking our steady progress towards Africa's enigmatic shores. The change from the P&O steamer to Zanzibar's chaotic vibrancy was an assault on the senses, yet exhilarating. The sun beat down relentlessly, drawing forth a myriad of scents. Sweet cloves, pungent drying fish, salty ocean, and an underlying musky odor I could not quite place. A babel of Swahili, Arabic, Hindi, and European commands filled the air. I heard the rhythmic creak of dhows and the distant thrum of a native drum. Holmes, ever imperturbable, stood beside me on the quay, his grey eyes sweeping the scene, his lips set in keen concentration. "Observe, Watson," he remarked, his voice cutting through the din. "The currents here are not merely oceanic. See how the Arab dhows grudgingly give way to steam launches, a microcosm of empires on this waterfront," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. We left the port's clamour for the stone town's labyrinthine alleys. Tall, whitewashed buildings fractured the sunlight, their carved doors hinting at a storied past. The air grew heavy with spices from unseen courtyards, and I heard the murmur of life behind latticed windows. An unease settled upon me, a feeling of being watched, but Holmes strode on, his gaze constantly scanning. "Our inquiries must begin closer to the ground, Watson. Official channels will offer little but polite obfuscation. We need a voice from these alleys, one that speaks the port's true language." He paused, his attention caught by a wiry man near a coffee stall whose intelligent eyes followed us. With a nod, Holmes led us into a quieter, narrower passage. The sounds of the main thoroughfare receded, replaced by the scuttling of unseen creatures and the drip of water. The man, introducing himself in hushed, accented English as Yusuf, materialized from the shadows. His voice was a low whisper, his eyes darting nervously as he spoke. "You are new here, sirs. English. Seeking information." He spoke carefully, weighing each word. "Many seek information in Zanzibar. Not all find what is good for them," replied Yusuf. "We seek to understand the troubles with the new telegraph cable," Holmes stated plainly, his direct tone leaving no room for evasion. Replied Sherlock Holmes. Yusuf's eyes flickered. He drew closer, the scent of cloves on his breath. "Ah, the iron snake beneath the waves. It has enemies. Some blame angry spirits. Others," he paused, lowering his voice, "speak of pale-eyed men, voices like iron, paying for silence. They visit Sheikh Rashid bin said. He preaches tradition, but his palm itches for coins of progress, or sabotage," answered Yusuf. Holmes remained silent, absorbing this. The distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoed down the alley, a sharp counterpoint to Yusuf's low tones. "Sheikh Rashid bin said," he mused. "A man of influence with German sympathies, as reports suggested, and a disdain for British enterprise. Our voyage, Watson, has brought us to a promising juncture. This sheik is our next port of call." "Yusuf, your information has been illuminating," replied Sherlock Holmes. A silver coin passed from Holmes to Yusuf, who melted silently back into the shadows. The alley air seemed to hum with unspoken intrigues. Our arrival in Zanzibar, I knew, was the true start of a perilous investigation. The path to the severed cable now clearly led to Sheikh Rashid's door. Secured by our informant, the descending afternoon sun found Holmes and myself before Sheikh Rashid bin Said's imposing residence. A heavy, intricately carved wooden door, brass-studded, groaned open. A servant, bare feet silent on cool stone, led us into a reception chamber. Opulent yet somber, the room spoke of great wealth. Persian carpets hushed our footsteps, while the air hung thick with cloves and an exotic sweetness. A distant fountain's murmur countered the city's unseen clamor. Sheikh Rashid rose from silken cushions, his dark, shrewd eyes in a fleshy face appraising us keenly, unreadably. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I presume, and Dr. Watson. Your reputation precedes you, even to our distant shores. To what do I owe the honor of this visit?" responded Sheikh Rashid bin Said. Holmes inclined his head, his manner courteous but direct. "We are engaged upon an inquiry of some delicacy, Sheikh, concerning the repeated damage to the Eastern Telegraph Company's new cable. A matter, I believe, of some concern to all who value swift communication with the wider world," Sherlock Holmes said. A flicker of caution, or perhaps calculation, crossed the Sheikh's face before it settled into an impassive mask. He gestured towards a low table laden with refreshments. Indeed, a most regrettable affair. Such infrastructure is vital. Though one might argue, Mr. Holmes, that not all external influences are equally beneficial to Zanzibar. Some seek to impose, others offer partnership, answered Sheikh Rashid bin said. Holmes selected a date stone, examining it minutely before replying, his voice retaining its even pitch. Partnerships, Sheikh. An interesting choice of word. One hears whispers in the souks, you see. Whispers of new alliances, of promises made by those who might wish to see British influence diminished. Promises, perhaps, of enhanced local authority or more direct control over lucrative trade routes should existing arrangements be disrupted. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The sheik's fingers, heavy with gold rings, tightened almost imperceptibly on the divan. A faint metallic click sounded as one ring tapped another. His reply came a shade too quickly, too smoothly. Idle gossip, Mr. Holmes. The bazaar buzzes with fanciful tales. My interests. Zanzibar's prosperity and my people's welfare. If the Germans propose beneficial ventures without British complexities, is it not prudent to listen? Sheikh Rashid bin said answered. Holmes's eyes, which had never left the sheik's face, seemed to pierce through the man's careful composure. Prudent, indeed, Sheikh. Especially if such ventures come with assurances of significant personal enrichment and an elevation of one's own standing, irrespective of any broader nationalist sentiment. It suggests a man motivated not by fervent ideology, but by a clear-eyed assessment of opportunity. A man who might willingly collaborate if the price were right and the risk managed. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The sheik shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the intricate carpet patterns. The air seemed to thicken. The distant fountain suddenly sounded louder in the ensuing silence. He offered no denial, only a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. He spoke with a newfound weariness, his voice losing some of its earlier polish. A man must look to his own interests, Mr. Holmes, in these changing times. Loyalty is a commodity, and its price fluctuates with the market. Sheikh Rashid bin said answered. Holmes rose, and I followed suit. The interview, it was clear, had reached its conclusion. You have been most illuminating, Sheikh Rashid. Your pragmatism is, shall we say, quite transparent. He paused at the doorway. We shall not trouble you further at present, stated Sherlock Holmes, stepping from the sheik's cool dimness into Zanzibar's fading sunlight and vibrant street thrum. Holmes turned to me, grimly satisfied. The clatter of market stalls and vendors' cries filled the air around us. Well, Watson, our sheik is no fervent patriot. He is a creature of pure opportunism, readily swayed by the glitter of German gold and the promise of enhanced personal power. He has all but confirmed his willingness to aid those who would sever our vital line of communication. This points us rather directly, does it not, towards those who made such promises, deduced Sherlock Holmes. The Germans, Holmes, and specifically, Dr. John Watson inquired. His voice was sharp with anticipation. Precisely. The threads of this affair are drawing tighter. Our attention must now turn to Herr Otto von Clausen, the meticulous botanist with such an uncommonly detailed knowledge of the local seabed. I suspect his gardens may yield more than exotic flora, observed Sherlock Holmes. Our previous encounter with Sheikh Rashid having confirmed the man's venal motives, Holmes declared our next port of call to be the establishment of Herr Otto von Clausen, the German botanist. A short journey by hired Gary, the wheels crunching on the sun-baked track, brought us to a surprisingly verdant compound on the outskirts of Zanzibar town. The air hummed with the drone of unseen insects, and the scent of unfamiliar blossoms hung heavy and sweet. His voice was low as we approached a whitewashed building. A most impressive display of horticultural dedication, Watson. One might almost forget the more pressing matters of telegraphy and international intrigue. Sherlock Holmes noted. The scrape of a chair from within, then footsteps, preceded a man emerging from the shadowy doorway, wiping his hands on a rough canvas apron. He was of middle height, with fair hair brushed back from a high forehead and keen blue eyes that surveyed us with an almost unnerving scientific curiosity. This, I presumed, was Herr von Clausen. "Gentlemen, can I be of assistance?" His English was precise, with only the faintest trace of a German accent, his tone one of polite inquiry. Herr Otto von Clausen replied. "Herr von Clausen, I believe. My name is Sherlock Holmes, and this is my associate, Dr. Watson. We have an interest in the unique flora of these islands, and were told you are the foremost authority," Sherlock Holmes said. A flicker of something surprise, perhaps, or caution, crossed von Clausen's face before he masked it with a welcoming smile. He ushered us inside, the cool dimness a relief after the glare of the sun. The interior was a curious mixture of laboratory and study, with shelves groaning under the weight of specimen jars and leather-bound folios. The faint, not unpleasant, odor of preserving fluids mingled with the earthy smell of potted plants. "Indeed, my passion is the botanical wealth of Zanzibar. Please, allow me to show you some of my work." He spoke with an earnestness that seemed genuine enough, leading us past benches laden with microscopes and drying racks. Herr Otto von Clausen answered. "It is quite an impressive laboratory, Herr von Clausen. The sheer variety of specimens is astonishing. I imagine the tropical heat makes preservation a constant concern," Dr. John Watson commented. "Indeed, Dr. Watson. Constant vigilance and precise methods are essential, but the rewards of discovery in such a fertile environment are well worth the effort," replied Herr Otto von Clausen. Holmes listened with apparent rapt attention as von Clausen, after briefly acknowledging my own observation with a curt nod, expounded upon the myriad challenges of cataloging tropical species. The German spoke with a focused enthusiasm, his hands occasionally gesturing towards a particularly prized specimen in a jar. The faint, sharp scent of dried herbs and preserving chemicals seeming to follow his movements. My friend's gaze, however, roamed constantly, a silent, sharp counterpoint to von Clausen's lecture. His eyes, missing nothing, took in every detail of the cluttered room. I, too, found my attention drawn to certain incongruities. In one corner, the polished brass and glass of a barometer and hygrometer, part of a rather sophisticated set of meteorological instruments, gleamed softly in a stray sunbeam. More striking still, beside a collection of delicately pressed ferns, a heavy, leaden weight, unmistakably a sounding lead. Its rope coiled neatly beside it, lay as if carelessly discarded, its utilitarian form jarring amidst the botanical specimens. "Your studies must occasionally take you to the coastal waters, Herr von Clausen. The marine algae of this region are said to be quite unique," Sherlock Holmes noted. "Ah, yes, the marine flora," he replied, his voice maintaining its even keel. "Fascinating, though my primary focus remains terrestrial. However, one cannot ignore the interplay between land and sea." He gestured towards a large cabinet, responded Herr Otto von Clausen. It was then that Holmes, with an apologetic murmur concerning the intensity of the light that streamed through the dusty window panes, made a subtle shift towards that very window. As he did so, his arm, perhaps not entirely by accident, brushed against a tall stack of portfolios precariously balanced on a small, cluttered side table. There was a distinct rustle of stiff paper, followed by a soft but decisive thud as several of the portfolios slid to the floor, their contents spilling forth in a cascade of drawings and closely written notes. Von Clausen, startled by the sudden noise, made a small, sharp intake of breath and stooped at once to retrieve them. His usually pale face momentarily flushed a dull, angry red. It was in that brief instant, as the German's attention was wholly diverted downwards, that Holmes's sharp eyes, and indeed my own, following his subtle cue, fell upon a partially unrolled chart that had been concealed amongst the botanical drawings. One glance was sufficient. It was, I saw instantly, no innocent study of seaweed or coastal plants. My apologies, Herr von Clausen, how exceedingly clumsy of me. But what have we here? These appear to be rather detailed hydrographic surveys, not botanical sketches, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The German straightened, his earlier affability noticeably strained. A side interest, purely for academic comparison of coastal erosion patterns. One must understand the environment in its entirety to appreciate its flora, you comprehend. His explanation was delivered a little too quickly, answered Herr Otto von Clausen. The air in the small room grew suddenly tense, the silence between the men broken only by the amplified chirping of crickets outside. Indeed, and these soundings, so meticulously recorded, particularly around the deeper channels where the telegraph cable lies, such dedication to understanding mere erosion is commendable. Holmes's tone was mild, yet it carried an undeniable edge. Sherlock Holmes responded. "My methods are thorough, Mr. Holmes," von Clausen retorted, his voice now sharp and defensive. "It is the scientific way. These waters hold many secrets for those patient enough to look," replied Herr Otto von Clausen. Shortly thereafter, pleading other engagements, we took our leave. The sun beat down with renewed ferocity as we walked back towards the main road, the only sound for a time the crunch of our boots on the dusty path. "Well, Holmes," I ventured at last, lowering my voice. Those were no ordinary botanist's charts, and his explanation was remarkably thin, responded Dr. John Watson. A grim smile touched Holmes's lips. "Thin as a pressed flower, Watson. Those charts depicted the seabed with a precision utterly unnecessary for studying coastal flora. Note the detailed depth markings, the annotations regarding currents and seabed composition, particularly in the vicinity of the cable routes. Our botanist has an unnervingly accurate knowledge of the very underwater terrain where the cable has been repeatedly severed," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The implications were stark. Von Clausen was no mere academic. He was a man with a dangerous and specific expertise. His botanical interests have provided an excellent cover, but the charts tell a different story. However, charts alone do not cut cables. Our next step, Watson, must be to examine the severed sections themselves. I suspect they will have their own tale to tell. And so, our investigation turned from the deceptive, cloying tranquility of Herr von Clausen's botanical garden, with its carefully cultivated facade and hidden maps. The oppressive Zanzibar sun still beat down upon us as we departed, but our thoughts were no longer on exotic flora or the drone of insects. Instead, they were directed with renewed focus towards the more practical, and undoubtedly more revealing, domain of the cable repair ship, the CS Monarch. It was there, amidst the clang of steel and the scent of salt and engine oil, that the physical evidence of this intricate sabotage awaited our scrutiny. The tang of salt and tar was heavy in the air as we were rowed out to the CS Monarch, a vessel whose very silhouette spoke of grim, practical work. Her decks were a clutter of enormous drums, coiled cables like sleeping sea serpents, and strange, grappling machinery. The thrum of her engines was a constant, low vibration underfoot as we were assisted aboard by a burly seaman. His voice, when he greeted us, was a gravelly sound, much like the scrape of shingle on a beach. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, welcome aboard. Come below decks, gentlemen. I've the latest section they've hauled from the depths this very morn," Captain Henderson replied. We followed Captain Henderson into a cramped, brightly lit workshop below decks. The air here was thick with the smell of hot metal and something acrid I could not quite place. On a broad, scarred workbench lay a segment of the telegraph cable, perhaps 10 feet in length. It was a formidable object, thick as a man's arm. Its layers of gutta percha, brass tape, and steel wires brutally exposed at one end where it had been severed. He approached the cable without a word, his keen eyes already narrowed in concentration. "The conditions of its recovery, Captain," declared Sherlock Holmes. "Aye, deep water, Mr. Holmes, over 1,000 fathoms by the sounding line. We used the cutting grapnel to fetch this length from the seabed. The break was clean, or so the chief engineer first reported from the cable workshop," responded Captain Henderson. Holmes produced his familiar lens and knelt beside the severed end. The rhythmic clang of a hammer on metal echoed from somewhere deeper within the ship, a counterpoint to the gentle creaking of the vessel's timbers as she rode the swell. I watched as Holmes ran his fingers delicately over the exposed wires, his brow furrowed. A few of the ship's crew, their faces grimy and curious, had gathered at a respectful distance, their muttered comments ceasing as Holmes began his examination. He added, his tone still tinged with a residue of doubt, "Most likely fouled on a jagged rock or some uncharted seamount. It's the devil's own work when the seabed plays tricks like that." One of the crewmen, a powerfully built fellow with a weathered face and the insignia of a boatswain on his sleeve, stepped forward slightly, his expression openly skeptical. He cleared his throat, a rough, grating sound. "Beggin' your pardon, Captain and Mr. Holmes, but this here's deep-sea work. We've seen cables snap clean before. A strong current, a sharp volcanic outcrop. It don't take much. This ain't some back-alley scuffle in London, if you take my meaning," Bosun replied. A murmur of assent rippled through the other assembled sailors. Holmes, however, merely offered the boatswain a cool, appraising glance before returning his attention to the cable, though I sensed he had registered the challenge. "Your practical experience is noted, boatswain. The ocean is indeed a realm of immense and often brutal forces. Yet even she has her habits, her telltale signs. Let us ensure we are not too quick to attribute to her what might bear the mark of human artifice," declared Sherlock Holmes. Holmes made no further reply then, his attention utterly absorbed by the cable once more. Minutes passed, marked only by the faint hiss of a nearby steam pipe and the distant cry of a seabird that penetrated even to this metallic heart of the ship. Suddenly, Holmes straightened, a distinct glint in his eyes. He held up a minute speck of something on the tip of his forefinger, then pointed to a series of almost imperceptible scratches on the protective steel sheath near the break. He met the captain's eye, then deliberately turned his gaze to the skeptical boatswain before addressing them all. His voice, when he finally spoke, was crisp and decisive. "Gentlemen, this cable was not severed by natural causes, nor by any standard grappling tool. Observe these fine scratches. They are too uniform, too regular. They speak of a hardened steel blade, expertly applied. And this fragment," he indicated the speck, "is not marine growth, nor debris from the ocean floor. It is a trace of paint, Watson, a peculiar shade of viridian green, quite unlike any I have seen used on ships or for marine equipment," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He rose, brushing dust from his knees. The atmosphere aboard the Monarch shifted palpably, as if the very air had been charged by Holmes' revelation. The pressure required to cut through these outer layers, and then the core itself, at such a depth, would be immense. It would require a specialized cutting tool, likely lowered from a vessel positioned directly above. The tool was sharp, meticulously maintained, and wielded with precision. The green paint suggests it came from land, perhaps transferred from the cutting device itself, or even the hull of the vessel deploying it, declared Sherlock Holmes. "Good heavens, Holmes," I exclaimed. "Then it is deliberate sabotage. But who would possess such equipment and the audacity to use it?" commented Dr. John Watson. His gruff countenance had transformed, skepticism replaced by a grim understanding. "Green paint, you say, and fine cuts. Blimey, that's a rum go. I'll have my men scour the manifests for any vessels lately provisioned with queer cargo or tackle in Zanzibar, mark my words," answered Captain Henderson. Holmes nodded, his gaze distant. The sounds of the repair ship, the groaning winches, the shouts of men on deck seemed to fade as Holmes considered this new evidence. The mention of Zanzibar and the peculiar paint clearly sparked a new line of inquiry for him. I suspected our recent encounter with Herr van Klossen, and his familiarity with these waters was now at the forefront of my friend's thoughts. Indeed, Captain, and I, Watson, think it is high time we paid closer attention to the comings and goings at the Zanzibar docks. Such an operation would require a local base, or at the very least, local confederates, explained Sherlock Holmes. The Zanzibar moon, a silver sliver in the ink-black sky, cast long shadows across the old wharves. Holmes and I took up our watch. The humid air was thick. It carried a heavy, cloying smell of salt, decaying fish, and exotic spices. This atmosphere was punctuated by the rhythmic sigh of water against pilings and the distant, mournful cry of a night bird. Holmes stood beside me, a silhouette of coiled energy. He had spoken little since his announcement aboard the Monarch. His mind was clearly consumed by the meaning of the curious paint flecks and the strange marks on the severed cable. He had led me here with a firm assurance that allowed no argument. His earlier Eureka now showed a grim certainty. The answers lay hidden within the nightly schemes of this ancient port. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and taut. Patience, Watson. The creatures of the night are often the most revealing, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Hours crawled by. We marked time only by the shifting stars and the occasional scuttle of some unseen creature beneath the boardwalk. Behind us, the city hummed with a low, persistent sound. This sound was a contrast to the nearer, sharper creaks of mooring ropes and the gentle bump of dhows against the quay. My own patience was wearing thin when Holmes stiffened. His hand pressed swiftly on my arm. He breathed, "Observe, Watson. Our German botanist keeps late hours," declared Sherlock Holmes. Indeed, the unmistakable figure of Herr Otto von Klossen emerged from the maze of narrow alleyways leading to the dark side. He moved with a secretive caution, his head darting left and right, a stark contrast to his usual scholarly stoop. He paused by a stack of crates, apparently full of cloves. Their strong smell briefly overpowered other dark-side scents as he glanced at his watch, its faint metallic click barely audible. Minutes later, two, then three, shadowy figures appeared from the deeper gloom of a warehouse doorway. Their low whispers, though unclear, carried an urgent tone as they approached Van Klossen. The men were clearly Zanzibaris, robed and turbaned. Their movements were agile and purposeful. Though their faces remained hidden, their respect for the German was clear. We edged closer, using stacked bales and barrels as cover. The rough sacking scratched at my cheek. In the tense silence, the lapping water seemed to grow louder. Each small sound could betray our presence. Fragments of their hushed conversation reached us, carried on the unsteady night breeze. Words like "new attempt" south of Pemba and "the signal agreed" were mixed with Van Klossen's clipped, precise German phrases. I caught "absolut notwendig" and, most significantly, "Sheikh Rashid besteht darauf." Holmes whispered, his voice a breath against my ear. So Rashid is more than sympathetic. He's directing this enterprise. The botanist is his European expert, complementing local knowledge. Watson, those cable marks were no amateur work, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Van Klossen passed a small, heavy satchel to one of the men. Suddenly, a door creaked open down the wharf. The sound cut through the stillness. Heavy footsteps, like those of a night watchman, echoed on the wooden planks. The group by the clove crates froze. One of Rashid's men uttered a sharp, low curse. Van Klossen melted back towards the alley he had come from, like a ghost disappearing into the deep blackness. The other men hesitated only a second before scattering. Their bare feet made surprisingly little sound on the old wooden planks as they vanished among the cargo. Holmes pulled me back sharply, his tone urgent. Quickly, Watson, before the watch stumbles upon more than he bargains for, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. We retreated quickly, as we had to. The sound of the watchman's approaching footsteps, now with a tuneless whistle, grew louder. Once clear of the immediate dark area, we breathed a little easier on a deserted street. Holmes paused to brush at his coat. A most illuminating evening, Watson. Their collaboration is undeniable, and Rashid's commitment absolute. The German provides the method, Rashid the means, and the local intelligence. He held up his fingers to the faint light of a distant lamp, examining minute particles he had brushed from his sleeve. His voice held a new note of keen interest. And it would seem their meeting place leaves its own particular calling card. Interesting, very interesting indeed, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. I looked at the almost invisible dust on his fingertips, puzzled. But the familiar glint in his eye told me Sherlock Holmes was already several steps ahead. He was on a scent I could not yet make out, one I felt sure would lead us deeper into the heart of this Zanzibari conspiracy. The tension from our narrow escape at the docks still hung in the air, even in our Zanzibar lodgings. The humid morning air, thick with the scents of clove and cardamom from the stone town, did little to ease it. Holmes, however, seemed unaffected. His focus was entirely on a tiny piece of the severed telegraph cable laid out on a white cloth on our makeshift lab table. For a long while, the only sounds were the whirring of a ceiling fan and the distant cries of street vendors. Watson, your medical eye will appreciate this. Look at these tiny particles caught in the frayed hempen covering of the cable, observed Sherlock Holmes. I leaned closer, looking through the powerful lens he offered. Against the dark strands of the cable, I could see tiny, colored specks. The air in the room, already heavy with the island's spicy scent, seemed to grow thicker as Holmes prepared to reveal his findings. At first glance, Holmes, this looks like some sort of natural debris. Could it be common dust, or perhaps spice? Responded Dr. John Watson. Precisely, my dear fellow. Zanzibari spices, to be exact, but not just any spices. See here, he pointed to a smear on a glass slide. I've isolated several. Nutmeg, a trace of cinnamon, yes, but also something far more telling. Ground cloves adulterated with a specific type of reddish clay, almost invisible to the naked eye, and peppercorn dust mixed with fine charcoal powder. An unusual combination, wouldn't you say? Explained Sherlock Holmes. His sharp gaze met mine, and I saw the familiar glint of discovery that always signaled a major breakthrough. The pieces were falling into place for him, though I admit I still struggled to see the full picture. Adulterated, you say? Good heavens, Holmes, what is the significance of such a discovery? Asked Dr. John Watson. It signifies a unique signature, Watson. Such methods of adulteration, while shameful, are not uncommon in the dishonest parts of the spice trade. However, this particular combination, this exact recipe of deceit, I have read about it in my study of local commerce. It is a known, if secret, practice of a single spice processing warehouse on the outskirts of the city. My informants whisper this warehouse is merely a cover for the illegal business dealings of our acquaintance, Sheikh Rashid, observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's logic was irrefutable. The adulterated spice on the deep-sea cable could only have come from Sheikh Rashid's warehouse. As if to punctuate this revelation, a blacksmith's hammer clanged in a nearby alley. Am I to understand, then, Holmes, that this warehouse is our immediate destination? Wondered Dr. John Watson. Indeed, Watson, we shall pay an unannounced visit. I suspect we will find more than just spices, declared Sherlock Holmes. Later that day, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the winding alleyways, we stood before a large, run-down building. The air here was heavy with the strong smell of spices, much more concentrated than in the rest of the city. No sounds of normal business came from within, only a heavy silence, broken by the occasional rustle in the thatch roof. Holmes noted an unlocked rear door with a grim smile. The door yielded with a faint groan, barely disturbing the silence, and we slipped inside. The interior was vast and dim. Dusty beams of light cut through the gloom from cracks in the boarded windows. Piles of sacks, likely filled with spices, were stacked high, their scent almost overpowering. But it wasn't the spices that caught Holmes's eye. In a cleared area at the far end, partly hidden by a canvas sheet, lay a collection of strange equipment. Heavy grappling hooks, coils of unusually strong, thin wire, and several tube-shaped devices that looked disturbingly like custom-made cutting tools, their metal gleaming dully. Beside them, on a rough wooden table, lay a set of very detailed charts of the seabed, alongside documents in German. Holmes picked one up, his expression hardening as he read it. For a moment, the only sound was the faint scratching of rats in the walls. "As I suspected," he murmured, his voice a low growl. "We have here instructions for cable cutting, shipping records from Hamburg, and letters naming von Clausen as the operations director. It seems our German botanist is more an engineer of sabotage, working against British interests." The evidence was shocking, far more than I expected. This was no simple business rivalry. It was carefully planned, international sabotage. "They will have a ship, Watson," he stated, his eyes already looking beyond the dusty warehouse, towards the sea. "And they will certainly try to cut the cable again soon, thinking no one knows their methods. We must make sure Captain Henderson is prepared to give them a stronger welcome this time." Sherlock Holmes responded. He folded the most damaging document and placed it carefully inside his coat. The scent of cloves and conspiracy filled the air as we made our quiet exit. The path ahead now led surely towards the open waters of the Indian Ocean. The intelligence from Sheikh Rashid's warehouse had galvanized Holmes. He paced the CS Monarch's deck, a lean silhouette against the pre-dawn gloom. Beneath our feet, the engines thrummed a steady pulse. Before us, the vast, dark expanse of the Indian Ocean stretched, indifferent to our purpose. Captain Henderson, a sturdy, weather-beaten man, stood by the bridge. His gaze, sharp and unwavering, fixed on the horizon where the telegraph cable lay submerged, a vital artery of empire. His voice cut through the quiet hum of the ship, sharp and incisive. "They will come soon, Captain. The tide serves, and their instruments, as we discovered, are designed for swift, deep-water work. Their arrogance, Watson, lies in repetition, believing their methods beyond detection," explained Sherlock Holmes. I watched a faint ribbon of light appear to the east, painting the undersides of the clouds. The air was cool, carrying the scent of salt and the faint, metallic tang of the ship itself. "My men are ready, Mr. Holmes," Captain Henderson answered. Henderson replied, his voice a low rumble. "Zanzibar's port authorities are alerted and standing by. We'll give our visitors a warmer welcome than they anticipate," responded Captain Henderson. Holmes nodded, a flicker of approval in his keen eyes. "The documents, you recall, detailed a modified dhow, shallow of draft for coastal work, yet fitted with quite specific grappling gear and an unusually robust keel structure. Von Clausen is no mere botanist. He is a meticulous planner. He will expect the cable to be vulnerable precisely here, at its deepest point before the continental shelf rises towards Aden," replied Sherlock Holmes. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, the sea shimmering under its tropical glare. Then a cry from the masthead. "Sail ho, 2 points to starboard. Looks like a local trader, sir." Holmes raised his glass instantly. After a prolonged scrutiny, he lowered it, a grim satisfaction on his face. "That, Watson, is our quarry. Note the unusual height of her mast for a vessel of that tonnage, and the way she sits low in the water despite a light showing of cargo. She is heavily laden, I'll warrant, with more than spices." Sherlock Holmes noted. His voice was calm, yet held an undeniable edge of anticipation. Captain Henderson's crisp commands echoed across the deck. The CS Monarch responded, altering course. The thrum of its engines deepened, picking up speed, and the spray began to hiss more vigorously against our bow as we cut through the waves. The dhow, initially unsuspecting, soon realized it was the object of our focused attention. A sudden flurry of activity erupted on its decks, shouts carried faintly on the wind, figures scrambling as they attempted to change tack. But the Monarch, a vessel of considerable power and maneuverability, began to close the distance with relentless precision. A signal lamp flashed from our bridge, a sharp, bright inquiry. Moments later, an answering flicker from the direction of Zanzibar confirmed our prearranged support. It was the harbor master's cutter, a sleek, grey-hulled vessel, smaller than our own but built for speed, now slicing purposefully through the waves. We could make out the glint of brass fittings and the determined figures of the uniformed Port Authority officers aboard, their presence a clear indication that any attempt by the dhow to flee towards the shallows and the familiar complexities of the coastline would be decisively blocked. The Monarch's security detail, a dozen stout men, moved with practiced efficiency, the click of carbines being readied a sharp counterpoint to the ocean's swell. They took their positions, armed with service revolvers and rifles. Captain Henderson, his face set, gave the order, his voice cutting through the mounting tension. A warning shot from our small deck cannon suddenly roared across the water, the sound echoing flatly over the waves. It sent a plume of spray erupting 100 yards shy of the dhow's stern. The effect was instantaneous. The dhow's clumsy attempt at flight faltered. It was clear they were outmatched. "Stand by to board," remarked Captain Henderson. Henderson bellowed, his voice easily carrying above the throb of the engines and the wash of the sea. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, if you please, observe from the bridge. My men will handle this," remarked Captain Henderson. With remarkable skill, the Monarch was brought alongside the now Hofter dhow. The grinding sound of fenders and the creak of timbers filled the air as the two vessels met. Grappling irons arced across the narrowing gap, biting into the dhow's railings with a harsh, metallic clang. Henderson, revolver in hand, was among the first to leap across, the thud of his boots on the dhow's deck quickly followed by his crew swarming after him. We heard sharp commands, urgent shouts, the sounds of a brief scuffle, but resistance was minimal. The saboteurs, though armed, were clearly not prepared for such a swift and professional interception. Within minutes it was over. A group of sullen-faced men, their hands bound, were being herded onto the Monarch's deck. Amongst them, his tropical suit now disheveled, but his expression one of cold fury, was Herr Otto von Clausen. He shot Holmes a look of venomous understanding. Holmes met his gaze coolly. "Herr von Clausen, I believe your cartographical studies of the seabed have proven a trifle too specific. A most unfortunate miscalculation on your part," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The captain soon rejoined us, his face flushed with success. "We have them, Mr. Holmes, all accounted for, and their vessel is laden with the very equipment you described, cutting tools, diving apparatus of German manufacture, and charts marking this precise location," said Captain Henderson. Holmes gave a curt nod, a silent acknowledgement of a job well done. The evidence was secured, the saboteurs apprehended. The intricate web, spun across continents, had been drawn tight by his relentless intellect. This victory was not due to any feat of physical prowess on his part, but to the careful orchestration of resources and the bravery of men like Captain Henderson and his crew. The sounds of the Monarch's engines changed pitch as the great ship began to turn, setting a course back towards Zanzibar, and then, eventually, for England. As we moved away from the scene of the confrontation, I knew that the most dangerous part of our Zanzibari adventure was concluded. The matter of its imperial repercussions, however, was yet to unfold, a silent question hanging in the tropical air. A London autumn chill had settled, sharp and invigorating against our faces as Holmes, and I journeyed to the Diogenes Club. The weight of the concluded case eased, replaced by an anticipation of Mycroft's scrutiny. Our hansom's rhythmic clatter on cobblestones faded into the profound, almost funereal quiet of the club upon our entry. Even the newspapers in the stranger's room seemed to rustle with a muted discretion, a testament to the club's stringent rules on discourse. A private withdrawing room awaited us, a concession, I presumed, to the sensitive nature of our report and Lady Beatrice, Foxglove's unusual presence within these male bastions. She sat composedly opposite Mycroft, a figure of elegant stillness. A low fire crackled in the grate, its faint hiss and the subtle scent of burning coals the sole disturbances in the expectant silence. Mycroft Holmes, monumental and impassive, regarded us from beneath hooded eyes. His voice, when it came, was devoid of inflection. "You have returned, Sherlock, and the Zanzibar cable," responded Mycroft Holmes. Holmes, never one for preamble, answered with a crisp nod. "Secure, Mycroft. Herr von Clausen and his associates are now guests of His Majesty, apprehended aboard their specially equipped dhow. The evidence recovered is, I believe you will find, quite conclusive," stated Sherlock Holmes. Holmes then recounted the final act, his narrative concise yet vivid. He detailed the meticulous tracking across the turquoise waters, the crucial interception at sea, aided by Captain Henderson's stout vessel battling the ocean swells, and the swift, efficient capture of the saboteurs under the unforgiving glare of the Zanzibari sun. Lady Foxglove listened intently, her intelligent gaze moving between my friend and his brother, missing no nuance of the tale. Her voice, clear and possessed of a certain worldly wisdom, interjected smoothly. "A German operation, then, confirmed beyond doubt. Their ambition in East Africa clearly extends beyond mere cartography," said Lady Beatrice Foxglove. Holmes affirmed, his tone precise. "Indeed, Lady Beatrice. Von Clausen was merely the sharp end of a much larger spear, undoubtedly wielded from Berlin. Their aim, to disrupt the Zanzibar cable. This was no mere inconvenience. It was a calculated strategic blow, designed to isolate our interests, to create an opening for German influence to expand unchecked. It highlights, yet again, the profound fragility of our imperial lifelines. Cut one nerve, and the entire system trembles," observed Sherlock Holmes. Mycroft shifted his bulk slightly, a minute gesture that somehow conveyed considerable thought. "So, the great game plays out beneath the waves as vigorously as upon land. This venture, Sherlock, demonstrates a disturbing escalation in their methods. And what of local complicity? Sheikh Rashid, for instance," responded Mycroft Holmes. Holmes replied, steepling his fingers. "Resentment and opportunism, Mycroft. A complex brew, as is so often the case in these distant territories. The moral landscape of empire is rarely simple, a truth you understand perhaps better than any. Von Clausen's charts were most revealing. They went far beyond the seabed, detailing vulnerabilities, local allegiances, potential leverage points, a veritable blueprint for widespread destabilization." Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The coded logbook we had seized told a chilling tale. As Holmes deciphered its cryptic entries with his usual brilliance, a systematic campaign unfolded before us, far more ambitious than we had initially suspected. Each revelation peeled back another layer of the German plot, exposing its full, alarming scope. I ventured, my voice dropping to a grave whisper. Had they succeeded fully, the implications for our communications with India and East Africa would have been nothing short of catastrophic. Dr. John Watson inquired. Mycroft nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Quite so. The official report for the Foreign Office will demand careful phrasing. For now, the less said about the precise nature of German involvement, the better. Diplomacy, after all, has its own currents to navigate," said Mycroft Holmes. A palpable tension filled the room. the unspoken chasm between the raw, often brutal, truth of events and the polished narrative required for public consumption and delicate international relations. Lady Foxglove gave a small, understanding sigh, the soft rustle of her silk dress a faint counterpoint to the steady crackle of the fire, each sound accentuating the gravity of the moment. She murmured, "The shadows of empire are long indeed, and often conceal more than they reveal." Lady Beatrice Foxglove said. Mycroft made a small gesture, as if dismissing the philosophical implications for more practical matters. He turned slightly in his chair, his attention already shifting to the necessary machinations of state. His voice adopted a formal, dictatorial cadence, directed towards an unseen secretary, or perhaps merely to the room at large, initiating the official record. Commence memorandum. Subject: unforeseen technical difficulties affecting the Zanzibar Aden telegraphic link. These difficulties, now resolved through diligent engineering efforts, appear attributable to severe and unusual submarine geological activity, exacerbated by unexpectedly strong abyssal currents, Mycroft Holmes answered. Holmes caught my eye, a familiar flicker of dry amusement in his keen expression. The true, intricate tale, one of espionage, ambition, and the precarious sinews holding an empire together, would remain confined to the knowledge of a select few within those hallowed halls. Official annals, it seemed, would speak only of the earth's unpredictable caprice. I wondered then, as I have often wondered since, how many such carefully constructed narratives formed the very bedrock of the history presented to the world.